My name is Yehudi Menuhin. Menuhin comes from Menuhin, which in Hebrew, menucha, means peace, and I'm a musician. This is the first time that I'm landed on a rubbish field, probably exactly where I belong, though I haven't yet made it, as they say. I know one thing, and that is that my birth was a very welcome event to my parents. They really were happy that I arrived, and I was very happy to be with them. They made me feel I was the center of the universe. My music comes from probably both parents. My father used to sing an incredible number of Hasidic songs that he remembered from his childhood. And my mother danced whenever she was happy. When my father was sent to Jerusalem to live with his grandfather, a very saintly man, he had to go through the very rigorous Orthodox training, very cruel, rigorous, and for him, meaningless. And he revolted. He ran away, and he finally met my mother again, as he had been courting her in Jaffa, in New York, quite by chance. They had left Russia in good time before the pogrom of 1904. And then, after a short few years in what was then Palestine, they met in New York. Already when I was 2 or 3, when I was taken to concerts and saw the violin being played, I wanted to play it. And that has been the key to my whole life. And if I had to say in a very few words what my life is all about, I would say that it is giving voice to the voiceless, to the violin, to the scores, musical scores, and now extending this principle to the many minorities who have no voice: Gypsies, Kurds, Albanians in Kosovo, any number, hundreds of groups which require representation and a voice. I'm trying to organize that in the way of an assembly of cultures which would contain the spokesmen or spokeswomen of the many various European cultures, the very wealth of Europe, and would be supported by the European community, a counterweight, as it were, to the political parliament. I think this represents the only possibility of avoiding civil wars by giving people a platform on which they can express their own opinions, their hopes, their criticisms, and listening to that voice as part of the legislative structure of Europe. Education is another complementary aspect of my present interests. At this very moment, I'm working on a series of films to cover the very first stages of violin playing, before a child has handled a violin but wants to play it. That is when the worst faults gather. Those first lessons, those first efforts with the violin and bow are what determine a violinist's future. And many violinists never rid themselves, never free themselves of those earliest habits, bad habits. I'm also convinced that the introduction of arts to children at the earliest age is of extreme importance. They are born with the sense of hearing. They already remember quite a lot at the moment they're born. And hearing consists of both listening and speaking or singing. It's a two-way commerce. And therefore, it is also the basis of thinking, because thinking rests on both feeling and logic. And any thinking that's devoid of feeling is untrustworthy. And any feeling that's devoid of thinking is impossible to follow. It is listening and reacting with song and speech that is the basis of thinking. We remember the voices, we compare, and we draw conclusions based on both the feelings we have as we react to the voices and the logic of memory and comparison. What makes life livable for me is love. Life would be unlivable for me were I in the terrible situation of not being able to be of use to anybody. My definition of happiness is to see children singing, dancing, and pleased with their progress. They always are when they are learning what they want to know. My definition of unhappiness is hopelessness and helplessness. The worst thing that ever happened to me was when our child died. I would say the worst thing or things I ever did was to make particularly my parents or my wife unhappy. I would wish that human beings would learn from their mistakes. That hasn't yet happened. They can learn new things, but they can't learn old things. My definition of work is an activity which is fulfilling and satisfying, or simply a job that one does well and takes satisfaction from that. Art is our essential comment, our consciousness of existence. It has always been part of man. It is part of the animal world. When you think of the wonderful plumage of the lyrebird, for instance, or the beauty of the plumage of the lyrebird, or the beauty that is around us in the flowers, the trees, the wonderful life of the earth. I think actually that there is no distinction between art and life, that living is an art, and the separation that we do between art and life is a dangerous one and a suicidal one. Love, I would say, is the element that binds us all together and to each other and to the eternal, to the future and the past. It is composed of interest, sympathy, curiosity, the desire to protect, the desire to learn. It is in fact the what would you say? It contains, love contains within itself almost all other emotions, if you include its opposite, which is rejection. suspicion, and hate, by definition, then love includes everything, every emotion. I feel that other living beings, not necessarily only human, but mainly human, are essential to me. I'm dependent on them, and I think we are all interdependent. This is perhaps the natural reason for respect, gratitude, and love. We are dependent also on the sick, on the poor, on the suffering. They give us much to think about and clarify our minds about values. I think myself, because I have been extremely lucky. I've had wonderful people around me, wonderful parents, friends, teachers, audiences, creative people, composers, painters, sculptors, children, and the whole of nature. I'm really very, very lucky. Human beings are part of the universe. They are made of the same materials as the stars, but they are possessed of a much higher level of consciousness. We do not know beginnings and ends because our minds are taken up with the daily experience. But we are part of beginnings and ends, which presumably will be revealed at some time or other. While we are alive on Earth, I think we must learn as much as we can, we must give as much as we can, and we must be aware of dimensions greater than our own. Death for me is part of life. There would be no life without death. It's part of our continuity. Whether any part of us survives, any part of our consciousness survives, in any kind of adventure, it's impossible to know. But that there is a continuity that unites us with the farthest stars, of that there can be no doubt. Selige Sehnsucht from Goethes westöstlicher Divan. Sagt es niemand, nur den Weisen, weil die Menge gleich verhöhnet. Das Lebendige will ich preisen, das nach Flammentod sich sehnet. In der Liebesnächte Kühlung, die dich zeugte, wo du zeugtest, überfällt dich fremde Fühlung, wenn die stille Kerze leuchtet. Nicht mehr bliebest du umfangen in der Finsternis Betrachtung, und dich reißet neu Verlangen auf zu höherer Begattung. Keine Ferne macht dich schwierig, kommst geflogen und gebannt, und zuletzt des Lichts begierig bist du Schmetterling verbrannt. Und solang du das nicht hast, dieses Stirb und werde, bist du nur ein trüber Gast auf der dunklen Erde. Now it is my turn to ask a question. I will not know the answer until you will send it to me in some way or other. I was wondering whether my interpretation of your thoughts, of your motives, is the same as my own and is true to what you yourself feel and think. What I search for is to reveal ourselves to each other. Tell me how you would define yourself as an artist.